The following podcast episode contains adult language and super sexy purity culture talk. Listener discretion is advised.
We've been talking a lot about the different aspects of church and religious trauma this season, and one major element that always rears its ugly head is purity culture. From purity rings, slut-shaming, and victim blaming, to sexual dysfunctions, mental health problems, and identity crises. These issues have affected millions of people and were often perpetuated by the church and conservative leaders. Why didn't teaching abstinence work? Why is there a double standard in the sex lives of men and women? And why are people well into their middle age still unpacking the guilt and shame that goes along with having been raised in purity culture? So get ready for some steamy, hot talk about purity culture. We have an awesome panel joining us. I'm your host, Matt, and this is the Going There podcast.
Get ready to challenge your own opinions and ideas, because these folks are going there. Taboo topics are back on the table.
Purity culture. What the hell is it? Well, it's something terrible. It's something that brought us all here today, though, and it's a topic that we could probably do an entire podcast series on for seasons and seasons, because it's something that has had a lot of ramifications on the people on this earth today, but especially in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So before we get into it and unpack it and learn a little bit more about it, let's introduce our panel, starting with our returning guest, Mr. Sir Mylan.
Me?
You.
Great. So my name is Sir Mylan Cartwright. I am a multidisciplinary artist.
I thought you were about to say multimillionaire.
I wish. I wish. But I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I am a playwright, a makeup artist, an actor, singer, and culinary arts instructor.
And an all-around badass.
And I'm a badass.
And rejoining us from season 1, showing up here all the way from New York City, is Maddie Jo.
Hi, I'm Maddie Jo Cowsert. I am a multi-hyphenate. I say I'm an actor, writer, Polly Pocket gladiator. I like to write stories, act in stories, film make, and occasionally post ab pics no one asked for.
LeJohn asked for them, I believe. And as always, we have to have a therapist at the table for free therapy in every episode. And this time we have somebody who's very specialized in what we're talking about today. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beth Wilson, and I am a counselor. And as you guessed it, I specialize in working with couples and any sexual health-related issues, including purity culture.
Of the people that you work with and that you see, is purity culture a pretty big theme throughout?
I would say that in most of the cases that I see, it probably hovers around maybe 60% with either the individuals, or if I'm working with a couple, one of the two probably has some remnants of purity culture that they're struggling with.
And the other 40% just don't know it.
Yes.
That's my assumption.
Yeah.
Because even, we'll talk about it here in a minute, but even if there's not a religious element to it, our generations went through that. You were raised to believe, unless your parents were specifically teaching you in a different way that is mainstream, it was like abstinence is the only way. It's the only way. Stay pure. Just don't have sex. Because that's biologically possible. Before we get into the informational side of this, I want to ask my other panelists, what do you think of when you think about purity culture? Is there something that defines it to you?
I don't know. I kind of think of like Mormonism or, some type of religious aspect of it, tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah, I sometimes, we think of pure, of course, as being white, as Mary Jo said earlier before we started filming. But of course, like you think of just abstaining, just, tradition, religion, those type of things come to my mind when I think about purity.
Maddie Jo, is there one thing that defines it for you?
I think the upholding of, like, the militant upholding of gender roles. So that if you do not fall into each one perfectly, everything falls apart. But as we know, upholding those standards militantly is so harmful to both men and women.
Yes, absolutely. As we talk about it in this episode too, I want to mention that because in the traditional sense of purity culture, there's only two genders. And so when we're saying men and women, of course we mean there's all kinds of different classifications and non-binary people. But according to purity culture, there's just two. So, and I love to put my foot in my mouth. So if I misspeak, please tell me. I'd love to hear that. Beth, would you say there's one thing that you think of when you think of purity culture?
The sort of definition of purity culture sort of arised from the white evangelical Christian church in like the early 1990s. But it really, to me, it encompasses any sort of extreme religion. Not to bash, any particular religion, but it becomes a problem when you have your values, the individual's values no longer fall in line with whatever religion they were brought up with. And that can vary it's cross-cultural, and it can vary from any religion.
So do you think it's like a grooming thing?
Purity culture?
Yeah.
Oh, it's definitely grooming for women, and it's a control thing. I think.
It's the thing about purity culture is and I realized this in my own journey, it's the perfect recipe for perfectly upholding rape culture.
Yeah.
Because all of the onus in sexual anything is on women. So therefore, if something bad happens to us sexually, there again, the language, right? It happens to us. It was done to us. It was not done by someone else. Then it's all our fault. Like all of the language around it. Yeah. Or like, why were you at his apartment?
Why did you wear those stockings?
Why did you drink? Why did you do anything normal other than have your door locked watching Friends and someone beat your door down with a baseball bat and raped you? Like if that's not your story, what did you do to cause this? And that's the story of purity culture. It like lays the foundation perfectly to set up American culture at large that is rape culture.
Purity culture doesn't teach consent. No. That's probably the biggest part, because it basically says there's an absolute. And when you have an absolute, okay, so it's abstinence, right? We talked in one of the episodes about an abstinent diet. So if you're looking at abstinence, it means you can't do it at all. Not in moderation, not in a healthy way. So if you fuck up, when I gave up sugar, which is really hard for me, I'd have an easier time giving up sex, to be honest. I give up sugar, and then I eat a candy bar. And I'm like, well, fuck it. I might as well eat 100 candy bars now, because I've already ruined this abstinence that I was trying to perpetuate in my diet. So you're setting yourself up for failure, because you're teaching it to kids who are going through puberty, who are walking hormones, and you don't give them a positive outlet for it, even on their own time, even any kind of form of masturbation or anything. It's like, it's all wrong. And not just that, but God is frowning on you. So you're in the corner crying, jacking off, and going, God, please don't punish me.
Yes.
Purity culture has so many problematic things, and you had mentioned it, and you said Mormonism. It's certainly not just evangelicals, but the evangelical movement in the 90s was what many of us in our generation saw. But yeah, it's Islam has major rampant problems with that, and of course you have Mormonism and some of the different denominations and sects of the Christian church and the Christian faith, and what it comes down to is it's something that we know that doesn't work. But what they did was they created a lot of mental health problems in people who came out of it. And I won't speak for anyone else at the table. I'm one of those people who has a lot of issues that I'm still at 40 years old unpacking and trying to figure out, why am I so fucked up? And God, please stop crying. I just have to finish watching this video.
Not yet.
Yeah, 5 more minutes. So Beth, what's your job? What's your role as a sex therapist, people working through these things?
My role is really just to help them begin to heal when they've made the decision to remove themselves from purity culture. And it's a very long process. It's not something that you can get done in a couple of sessions or even probably a year. And also something to keep in mind is even when people are, brave enough to stand up and be their authentic selves and embrace their recovery, there's times when they may fall back, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like even months, what it looks like when they first come out of purity culture may be completely different, like a month or even a year.
What does that look like, Beth? Like, what do you tell someone that's coming out of purity culture? Like, start off with a hand job.
No, a lot of it is, well, I can't speak for Beth.
But I like where he's going.
You know what I'm saying? Like, what does that look
that
like?
is actually, all joking aside, that is part of the process.
Okay.
People coming out of purity culture they have very low, I'm going to throw a scientific term.
Please
it's
do.
called-
We want people to listen to us and not think we're just all dick jokes. And
that is called interoception. And it's kind of like your body's awareness of, somewhat space and time, but it's also, just the internal, it's kind of known as like the 8th sense, if you will, interoceptive awareness. Just knowing those things of how our body is in correlation with our mind, like, am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Am I sexually aroused? All of those things are very, very low in someone who's coming out initially of purity culture. So part of that process is to get in touch with their bodies. There's a whole lot of body shaming and saying the body is bad, and we're not born with that initially, but all of these things are teaching us.
It's taught to us in the very first Sunday school lesson of Adam and Eve.
Yes.
Adam and Eve were naked, running around until that Jezebel Eve made Adam eat her apple.
Right. When God was bamboozled by his own creation with this like sin thing.
This human rib just destroyed it all. And then suddenly, and this is at least the evangelical teaching of it, is suddenly God made them ashamed of their bodies and their nude, form. And so they had to cover it with fig leaves and stuff. So from the very beginning, and Adam and Eve is one of the very first Sunday school lessons you hear. So your body is to be, ashamed of. And if you are naked, it should only be by yourself unless you're married and to a spouse who is of the other of the one of two genders. And so if you buy into it, even at a subconscious level, there's no getting away from that, I don't think.
Well, and it goes even deeper than that, right? Because the whole concept of original sin is that we're born bad.
Right.
So then we need God to save us from our badness. Without him, we are nothing. That's literally repeated over and over in worship songs and whatnot. And so
I know, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So God, look, and I still have faith. I still have a faith. And I know that you do as well, and I know that you do as well. So I'm not bashing God, and I'm not bashing this, but I love to bash on organized religion on this show. This idea that this all-powerful, all-knowing man, because it's a man, right?
Man.
Created us just so we could worship him all day long and feel horrible about ourselves. That doesn't sound like God. That sounds like the devil.
Well, it sounds like a fucking narcissist.
Yeah, I mean,
Very narcissistic.
yeah. How evangelicals talk about God is like God is this like angry, petulant little child, like, fuck you, worship me. And you're like, oh my God, I'm sorry I'm naked. I'm sorry I have balls. So yeah, it's very stupid. I want to ask you guys, and Beth, you as well, if you're willing to share, what were you taught? What is your earliest memory of what you were taught about sex?
I don't think I was ever taught about sex. I think
Are you still confused? Beth can give you some lessons over here.
Sure. As far as religion goes, it was for me growing up, it was always those nuances and different things that we were taught in the African American culture, which is like Baptist, Church of God in Christ, those type of traditions where women weren't allowed to wear short skirts. Mm-hmm. They had to wear long skirts. If they did, they had to wear the handkerchief over the knee, and ankles had to be crossed. It was like an etiquette type thing. For me, sex wasn't because I think my parents knew what I was about. Then even in church, you know what I'm saying? So what are they gonna say? Like they just say like you're not gonna be.
They're gonna say, Sir Mylan, don't have sex with a woman before marriage. You're like done.
And won't.
Like, I think I can abstain. I can abstain.
Cheers.
Cheers to that.
I can do that. But yeah, exactly. Like, what was my dad gonna say? And we had this conversation before. Like, I don't have daddy issues at all. When people think, okay, he's a gay man, that he has to have a father in his life. I did. I'm a daddy's boy. It's tattooed to my arm.
You have a different kind of daddy issues.
No, I don't have any daddy issues at all. Like, I don't. But I do have mommy issues. And I think if I did have a relationship with my mom like I did with my dad, maybe I probably would be with a woman or would have experienced that type of intimacy with a woman. May have, dived in.
But knowing how like perfection that your presence is, I think God made you this way.
I think God made me wonderfully too.
Perfectly. Yeah.
Beautifully and wonderfully made.
Yes, our attributes.
Put it on a canvas.
Yeah, I wrote something. It's funny you said that. I wrote something that I just did at Cleveland Public Theater, and one of the things in my monologue was that I hear Mama praying at night about what God clearly made wonderful. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that it came from me. Like but as far as sex goes, like, man, I can't even think about it. All I knew was that for me, I was over sexualized in church by men. Mm-hmm. Right?
They knew.
I knew. So it was like, do you want to stay after for, or this, that, it was that, but when I think about like my sister, I can remember like how my mom was like, oh, don't wear that. Don't do that. You don't want any man. But I think it's a little different in African American culture.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, unless you're part of a very rare sect of the Baptist church, sex is not focused on in the black church culture as it is in the white. But you have a whole different issue, and we've talked about it a little bit in season 1. I want to get into it today, too, of the purity culture of like, gay is not acceptable, except for behind closed doors, like, by the way, meet this guy in the rectory, like that kind of shit.
That kind of stuff, yeah. But that is it. Like, even when I think about black women, who I feel like, black women are the most unprotected species on this earth.
Absolutely.
Because of, what has happened to them through history.
Right.
So, of course, that tradition is going to transcend over and over and over again to what today. Yeah. Black girls don't know, the purity culture. They just don't. They don't know that it's okay. They feel like that's what they need to do.
Yeah.
Right.
They need to serve it up. Yeah. That's what they need to do. Whereas, Mary Jo, who didn't experience that, where her dad was like, look, don't screw.
Oh, you can say fuck.
I can say fuck?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, don't do it. Like, don't fuck. Don't let a boy touch your titties. None of that. Don't let that happen.
That is a goddamn shame.
It is.
Yeah, but like,
Maddie Jo, what were you taught? What was your earliest memory of being taught about sex?
I'm glad there's a therapist present.
Yeah.
Because to be honest,
Start the clock.
I always joke that like my upbringing was like 50-50 Seventh Heaven, Winter's Bone. Like I have like half my family's meth the fuck out. The other half is pretty Jesus, like straight lace, whatever. And so when I was over at my cousin's house, part of like the Winter's Bone crew, she taught me how to masturbate, essentially, which I didn't know that's what I was doing.
How old were you?
5. Yeah, young. And she knew because she had been exposed to things sexually because of her mother that like I hadn't been exposed to, right? And so then my mom would like catch me doing this, and then she'd just be like, don't do that. You know, like, even though it's the most normal thing ever, kids masturbate as young as like 2 years old. Like, it's not a weird, like, but she'd be like, don't do that. And there was something even then that I knew, I don't know why this feels like I should be secretive about it, but it does.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of like my earliest, but then I didn't get a talking to about it probably until like 5th, 6th grade. And
They're
then
like,
it was
you gotta
purity
stop
ring.
doing that in the middle of class.
Quit it, Maddie Jo.
You've gone to the principal's office 7 times for masturbating this week.
No, but really it was the school that I went to was like, even like there was a 5th grade girl in my class pregnant.
Jesus.
So my parents were really afraid. You know, so I think that also lent itself to the abstinence. But also my parents, like, they did the whole, like, well, they didn't wait until marriage, but that's a whole other story.
And that seems to, that is such a common freaking story where it's like, don't do what I do, do what I say. Don't have sex.
Yeah.
I mean, we did, but don't have sex before you're married.
My parents were very much like, my memories of it are pretty much, you know, my parents glorifying and uplifting sex within a marriage as the best possible way you could have sex. And they would instill this in us by like, my parents were pretty, I'll just say it, they're like pretty horny for each other still. Like they hit each other on the butt, they make out, all this stuff.
That's super fantastic. Yeah. But they also lend the idea that this is the only type of healthy sex.
Yes, so that was my perception.
In God's eyes.
Yeah.
In God, well, yeah.
Well, period. Like they would back it up with like, well, you know, this is the case in which you're the most like emotionally safe, and which is not true, right? There are plenty of people in marriages who are not emotionally safe.
Yeah.
They're actually in abusive situations, you know, and like, so anyways, it wasn't just because it was the way that they saw it doesn't mean that that's actually the truth.
So I want to, this is a really good point I want to make. And this is completely candid. In trying to get this episode together, you can't do purity culture without a white female who was raised evangelical. And some of the other females who I know, who I also have talked to over the years, who experienced some of the same things that Maddie Jo, I'm sure, will be sharing today. There's a lot of one foot out the door and where they're saying, no, it was really harmful, but I also still believe that it's really sacred and should only be when you're married. But also I believe that like it was really fucked up. But also I don't want to say anything bad about my parents and the church. Like it's allowed to be a complicated thing where it's not an absolute. You're not saying your parents are terrible people for doing it. You have a very healthy relationship with your parents.
But because my parents have admitted that some of what they did was not okay.
It doesn't
which
excuse,
is rare.
It doesn't excuse what they did. And even if their intentions were good, even if their intentions were for the best, it still means that there's accountability in coming to terms with those things. And it's so funny to find people who I'm talking to who I assumed were at the same place that I was, and that's my own ignorance, I guess. And they're like, yeah, but I don't want to bash this. And it's like, I think you need to burn the whole thing to the ground and then figure out what's still left there, what if the framework is still intact.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's great when you find somebody like you who has burnt the fucker to the ground and then said, but now I still see the pieces that matter. Like your parents still matter to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think in my book, I call it the necessary pendulum. Like you have to pendulum to the other side.
And what's your book?
God, Sex, and Rich People. I haven't decided on the exact follow-up, subtitle yet.
She doesn't know if God or rich people or sex is going to come first. I think put just sex, and sex. That'll sell like hotcakes.
But yeah, I don't know if the subtitle is going to be figuring out faith, fucking in the 1% or something else. But yeah, I talk about the necessary pendulum because I do think it is actually, I know people who have still existed within the framework, but in my opinion, I don't know that you can truly break the chains from the abuser if you're still in their sphere, if you're still in their presence. So for me, I had to completely break ties with the abuser, which was the church. and I completely left, and I fully pendulum swung the other way to then finally find like a healthier, like to navigate to my own personal healthy sexual ethic.
Okay.
Beth, well, I'm curious. So I'm assuming you weren't raised in purity culture? In the sense of like evangelical purity culture?
No, I would say I was raised Baptist, but I really only went to church with my grandparents. So it was kind of like this loose association with the church.
Did the Baptist church that you go to, did they focus on sex a lot?
No, I don't really recall any conversations about sex through the church. I think
Lucky.
that my cues were mainly societal that I received,
Gotcha.
and my first memory was sort of peer related. My friend had sex, and she told me about it, and it was kind of gross, but
Yeah. It wasn't fun.
I was sort of in disbelief when she was telling me, but yeah, I was not thankfully raised in a purity culture environment.
Yeah,
my parents really didn't give me much direction, and it allowed me to be able to make my own choices. So
That's super healthy. But at the same time, I'm sure it still had some impact on you. I don't think anybody who's grown up in the last 40, years hasn't felt some impacts of it. And we live in this paradox, this dual society which says sex is bad, you shouldn't have sex, but also sex is everywhere and everything, and wanting it is bad. And for a female, you're not allowed to want sex. You should be desired. You should not desire sex. And there's these dueling messages that go across. And as a guy who, I'm not sitting here and downplaying how much it can mess with you as a male. As a male, it super messed with me. But for females, I think it's on average, and again, we're talking only two genders, it's that much worse. Because as a man, if you have sex, it's like, you fucked up. Woman, it's like, you have no
You're ruined.
value.
You're done.
You're done. I mean, what man would want that?
Yes, forever. You have scarred yourself. You're
ta-
marred.
Yeah, you talked about it, and it's actually been randomly in several episodes this season about the gum, like the chewed gum. No one wants a chewed piece of gum.
Like any symbolism of that, right? Like the Oreo that everyone has licked. Like, it's gross, the things they come up with. I told you about the tomato.
Oh, yeah,
The
that's
tomato.
even worse than the gum.
Yeah.
But no one's saying to a guy like, what's like a corn on the cob where all the corn's eaten off? Like no one's giving you these illusions.
Too many bites, buddy.
There's no corn left.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was speaking to your wife on the way here about like deconstructing purity culture for a woman, because I can't speak to the male experience, obviously, but like the women that come to me because of my blog content and whatever, the things that they come to me with, it's like so similar to what I went through, and it takes a long time, to your point. It's like it's not linear, first of all, and it's not something that you can just do overnight, and because it pops up in ways that you're like, really? Like, that's where this is coming from? So, like, for example, this woman was speaking to me about how, like, she still really struggles with this idea that if she sleeps with a guy, quote unquote, too soon, that must be the reason she's having bad luck with success in dating, right? Is because she desires to have sex with these guys, but then she does it and then they no longer respect her. That's the narrative that is going through her head. And I said, okay, well, something just as like seemingly simple as that, right? Which is a narrative in our culture at large. I think the whole like giving it up too soon, the chase is over, like all of that, but definitely heavily perpetuated in the evangelical church, is fraught with untruth, which is, first of all, it frames women as a conquest.
Right.
And so that gives men the permission to look at women's sexuality as something to be conquered, not experienced. And then you have to ask yourself, do I want to be with a man who looks at a woman's sexuality as something to be conquered instead of mutually experienced? And then on top of that, you have to ask yourself, why is this guy okay with shaming you for participating in the exact same activity he participated in? Why Why does he walk out of that being like, oh, that's so gross, that girl like slept with me so soon? Where was your dick, homie? Like,
that's so gross, that girl slept with me.
Yeah. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's so, but like they'll walk out
tricked you, slut.
But then, it's like,
crazy.
but they're confident about it because
Yeah.
they got laid. So it's very messed up. Like there's so many layers to it.
is.
And then I would say the third point is if that guy stopped being interested because he had sex with you, he was never interested to begin with.
Yeah.
Because any guy who is actually interested in you is going to be like, yes.
Yeah.
She had sex with me.
Yeah.
You know? And so it's like just from that one narrative to peel apart how you can then go into your next situation with so much more empowerment. And then also, fourth, like decide for yourself, what does too soon mean for you?
Yeah, too soon.
That is your chance to define for yourself.
And that's what I was talking about. Like you still kind of got one foot out the doors. Too soon means you're still being impacted by the purity culture. Even if you, because I can sit here and even you probably, we can sit there and intellectualize and say it like, this is bullshit. I don't believe this. But these subconscious things still come through in your behaviors and in your emotions where you're like, why am I thinking this?
Yeah.
Like, what is my holdup on this thing? Man, I won't even get into all of it today because we don't have enough time. But I'll tell you, I've unpacked some things in myself. I'm like, Jesus Christ, like
Literally.
the last 40 years, suddenly like all these little aha moments pop up. Because you go, this is all purity culture. And everyone's experience is a little bit different, but there's always some common themes. So, Beth, what are some of the common themes as far as the real world consequences that have come from people experiencing purity culture and trying to unpack it?
I would say the number one is just very, very damaging to the individual self, shaming. Obviously, their relationships suffer because they're not just aware of what they're experiencing.
Well, and they probably, even if you're in love with someone, somebody said it before the show. They're like, well, you got married. So the light switch, like, it's like suddenly, okay, now it's okay. And I will tell you, somebody who was married once before this and coming out of all the purity culture stuff, even though no part of my conscious mind bought into any of it, I still thought I would feel different after getting married. And then you get married and you have sex and you're like, nope, all those same shitty feelings are here. So not only is it dangerous to teach all this stuff, but it actually doesn't even work.
Yeah.
The idea of like saving I could only imagine if I had saved myself and then been like, what the hell? I was waiting for this nonsense.
That's what happened to me. That was my turning point, is like I went from like saving myself until marriage. I had a purity ring, like the whole 9 yards, had sex for the first time, unmarried, wearing my purity ring. And the guy actually asked about it. He was like, so weird. Are you married? I was like, did you really have sex with me thinking I was married? Anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, that defines men right there.
But that was basically what happened is I had sex and I was like, what if I had waited to marry that guy? Like, and that was my experience. Like, that was supposed to be this pinnacle of my existence. And all I want to do is like go eat French fries.
Yeah.
And that would probably be more pleasurable than what just happened.
Oh, you didn't want to smoke a cigarette?
No. I was like, get me out of this Lower East Side apartment now.
Leaked my nudes in high school. Any other time I shy away from melodrama, but
This super unsexy topic needs spiced up with some sexy music. Dissimilar South is the musician spotlight this week. Based in Durham, North Carolina, at their core is the musical relationship between Carter Hodge and Maddie Fisher, now a 6-year affair. Following their debut EP in 2019, the band enjoyed a successful release of Tricky Things, a full album in 2022 produced by the Grammy-nominated Jason Richmond. You can find them on Instagram at Dissimilar South or at dissimilarsouth.com.
just let him live his life. He says, let me be a poet. I've got things to say, and you know it.
This is my OG purity ring. The diamond is missing. There's probably like food in there. And look at how bent it is. I always like to say this is like hugely indicative of my purity efforts.
White knuckling it all the way through.
And then this is the purity ring that we used in the God, Sex, and Rich People proof of concept pilot. So, yeah, 3 for the Trinity, protecting my virginity. Purity rings, at least in my family, and we've since discussed how weird this is. It was given to us on our 15th Christmas by our fathers to say, like, we belong to our heavenly father and our earthly father until we belong to our husband. And then the purity ring gets replaced with our wedding ring. Isn't that fucking gross? This is a tangent, so cut me off at any point. But like the focus on vaginal penetrative sex being the thing that defines
the only thing that defines sex is
right.
There's a really good workbook that Beth shared with me by Erica Smith, and one of the things is it asks you to define sex. And even as somebody who's very, I would say, kind of open about all of it, I was like almost embarrassed at how few things I actually define as sex. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad or an indifferent, but it was like anal, vaginal, something else. And I'm like, yeah, none of that other stuff is sex. Because if it is, then I'm going to feel horrible about pretty much the rest of my life.
Yeah, it's very limited.
But you're right, because there's I knew of females who would pretty much do everything, and I mean everything other than that, because they were saving themselves. It's like, because God said, "Thou shalt not receive a man's penis vaginally, but orally and anally is okay." It's like, I just isn't that wild? Like, that's where your mind goes. Yeah. Because this one very specific thing, which Sir Mylan has no use for whatsoever,
No, that's not true, because I knew that, that I was gay or whatever. However, I saved myself. Like, I didn't want to catch any diseases, I didn't want to give, because sex is very special to me. Sure. So I wanted to wait until I got in a relationship so that I can enjoy it. So it was my own purity.
But that's not purity. That's you at your own will, and that's a healthy thing. Because for some people, these things might work, but because they feel like that's what they want. There's a big difference. And I'm saying there's no right or wrong answer. If that's what feels special to you, it can be sacred. It can be that special thing. And if it means,
but then my first experience was
most people's first experience. Most people's first experience is like, this is sex.
Yeah, you're like,
I waited until I was 21 to have sex with. I was
23.
Even though I knew for a very long time, all through high school, went through all the shaming and all that stuff. Oh, he's gay. And I was like, yeah, I've never been with a man before. You know what I'm saying? Like, get out of here. Mm-hmm. But I did have, a lot of the different mannerisms and all that different stuff that associated with being homosexual. Mm-hmm. So for me, like, the first experience and like saving myself and knowing what I wanted, what I'm saying? For even now, like when you say like, this is sex, like I think sex is sex. Like if you ejaculate and have an orgasm, then it's sex. Like, regardless of if you're getting your nipples flicked on or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
We're going to get real deep down a rabbit hole.
But if you decide that orgasm has to be part of it, then that leaves a lot of women out. Yeah. Because the orgasm gap is so real.
Pretty big.
Yeah. But I will, like, for some of my gay friends who have come out of purity culture, for them, I watched us go through. So my very first blog post was God and the Gays. And because I'm a theater kid, right? So I was like, these people are like my compadres. I don't want them to go to hell. And so that was the beginning of me being like, I think the church is like full of shit about some things. Yeah. And it was, a spiral from there. But then in New York City, I saw a lot of my friends who also came from the Midwest who were coming out, admitting to themselves for the first time, or were dating for the first time as gay men, like whatever. They had just as little idea of constructing a sexual ethic for themselves as I did. Like we were all just like what to do, and we all felt pressure from the different parts of society that told us how we needed to be. Theirs was different, which was like, as a gay man, you need to be sort of like flippant about sex, and the emotional attachment shouldn't matter. You should just be able to like go in a bathroom and fuck and then move on with your life. And then like which there's no problem
You're
with,
onto something.
but they just didn't feel as empowered, or they didn't have the tools to navigate it either.
And that's true.
Well, I just wanted to speak to this, narrow definition of sex that you mentioned, the penis and vagina, and how that's not just detrimental to, it's also really bad for even heterosexual men, because it's just this mentality. I see a lot of erectile dysfunction cases where they, you have to kind of broaden that definition in order to experience pleasure or to maintain an erection, and that sort of societal mentality, whether it's from purity culture or society or whatever the experience was for that individual, is very damaging. So
incredibly. I mean, purity culture is, I think for a long time I was like, fuck men, there's like the Me Too movement, and I was very angry about a lot of things that were going on in my life revolving men. But now, again, once like the pendulum and then back to middle, I can see this affects men hugely as well.
Yeah.
And I think understanding that has actually made my sexual relationship so much better, because I can have like empathy and grace for the pressures that are put on them, which is this like performative thing that it is what their masculinity is defined by. So if they can't show up in this perfect performative way, then they've failed, and it causes so much insecurity in them.
So
and if you
mean
know that
they can't take them to Pound Town. Is what
if
you're
there
saying.
is any sort of anxiety that is, or any sort of emotions or thoughts that are affecting them not being able to have an erection, which is supposed to not happen, right? Like, men are just supposed to be carnal.
They must have done something wrong.
Right. Like, they see some boobs, they should be able to get hard and do it, right? But if there's any sort of emotional involvement that might affect that, they're like, ugh, I'm a failure as a straight man. And so if I can understand that and be like, no, let's like have an honest, vulnerable conversation,
And it's the idea that if you're a good person and God likes you, like he will find a woman for you. And so if you're somebody, what's that?
That will make you come.
Yeah.
Yes, that will make you hard always.
Let's hope so. And so if you're this like repressed, very like awkward person, and you just want someone to love you or touch you or whatever, and no one's interested in you, it's like, well, God's punishing me. Why is he doing this to me?
And that's how I felt. For a very long time, I felt like that, because I was like, I was very awkward. Even, in my coming out to going out to the clubs and driving back from Kent and going downtown to all the clubs, whatever, and meeting guys. And it took a while for me to get that natch, you know what I'm saying? Even sexually, I just felt like I was awkward and I wasn't, so I was like, okay, this is God saying, oh, great. Because I know what my gift is. I know what my ministry is. I know what my calling is. So I was saying, okay, well, God, why did you make me have these desires? Because it wasn't something I just flipped on a switch.
Yeah.
And I was never raped or molested that I think of that would make me want to be with a man.
And we talked about that before.
Yeah, so why?
There's a lot of those assumptions that, somebody must have done this to you.
And no.
Yeah.
I didn't have that. I don't recall it, and there's nothing that I think I compartmentalized that, hiding, like, oh, my brother touched me. Like, I don't think that was the case.
Yeah. And Beth, to your point earlier about purity culture hugely affecting self, right? Like, I think that you're speaking to that, and I experienced it too, which was I had massive self-esteem issues because the only way I knew how to define myself was desirability from a man. And when it wasn't going well, I equated it to God was punishing me because I had sex before marriage.
Right.
And my whole life, was like, that was my narrative.
What's funny is that I was in a relationship for 15 years that he did not make me feel desirable at all. And so I was like, this is a continuance of my awkwardness of growing up, coming into this lifestyle. And it wasn't within the relationship that I did start to feel desirable, but not by him. And it was a woman that made me feel, oh, you're just so handsome. And I'm like, girl, like, really? You think I'm cute? But it went from that, and then she kind of unlocked something. And I think it's something within me.
Yes.
And it was unlocked, and then I started to become desirable to a lot more people.
Picture an unconfident version of you, just knowing you now.
It was there.
You did the work, man. That's awesome.
And that's what I tell everyone all the time. Like,
you did the work.
It came with a price.
Yes.
Sure.
Same.
And one thing that I always tell people was that I learned humility. Once you master humility in life, then you can go through any kind of course. But yeah, like that was my issue. And so now.
Yeah, well, in learning self, right? It is that learning that it's not going to come from outside of you. It's not going to come from an external source. It's not going to come from someone choosing you to be their wife or their partner. It's not going to come from God. It's not going to come from Jesus. It's only going to come from yourself.
It's that confidence.
In evangelical culture, going back to the Garden of Eden and original sin, in the New Testament. In the New Testament, it's the battle of flesh and the spirit.
Yeah.
So your flesh is always to be feared. Anything that is of you innately is to be feared. So that's the other thing of purity culture that is an undoing, and you can't extract it to just be physical. It's like this internal thing.
What were you taught growing up about your body?
Oh,
Was it okay to be naked? Was it okay to be... was it something shameful?
No, I remember I wore this like really cute outfit that I got from Delia's catalog. I know my millennial women know that reference. And it was like a really cute like pleated skirt and like a long sweater, double layer cami, very modest, and then like had these like leg warmers and
Assless
assless chaps, yeah, and these boots, and it was so cute. And I got to school and my pervy gym teacher made me change because he was like, your skirt's too short. I was like, my mom let me out of the house, so if she thinks it's okay. But I had to change. I got sent to the office and I had to change.
Was this public school?
Yeah, public school. And then, at church camp, it was the whatever your fingertips. We couldn't be showing our bellies ever. We had to always be wearing sleeves, if our shoulders were sexual.
Oh, I was going to say, and why? Not because, well...
To not distract the boys.
To not distract the boys. Because boys are too stupid and they can be controlled by women.
A mere belly button
and their
exposure.
sexuality. And women... Yeah, I mean, there's this idea that women are constantly trying to entrap men with their sexuality.
Yeah.
Their feminine wiles.
Yes.
Yeah, and as a guy, it's like, well, I hope you don't rape her. I hope it doesn't go south.
Yeah.
Takes away the accountability from where it belongs.
Yes,
exactly. There isn't really accountability in purity culture because it's not built in a realistic system that says, like, here's just how things are and here's the real life consequences. It's like, you're going to hell, I guess. If you get into heaven, you're going to have to walk through that lake of fire. Did they tell you what happens if you do break it?
Yeah. So
Is it just hell?
I was sort of alluding to this earlier in our conversation, which is like, I didn't grow up with a concept that like particular sins were going to land me in hell. There was a huge influence on grace in my family, which that's a whole other thing. But anyway,
Grace was the name of her father's mistress.
Right.
Just kidding.
No. But it was more that a choosing of a certain lifestyle and no longer being a Christian was what could make me.
That's the unforgivable sin, right?
Yeah,
Turning your back on God.
That's the blaspheming the Holy Spirit, whatever the fuck that means, which I think just means saying that I know better than God what's right for me, is the surefire, pun intended, way to go to hell. And so for me, it was this, as I started to peel away, like as I was accosted all the time with the lies of the evangelical church, I believed less and less in its virtues. And therefore I became less and less a Christian. And that scared me more than the punishment to not being a virgin or not being a pure woman or not upholding myself the way that like a desirable woman should. was simply that I would not be desired. And that is the worst thing to be as a woman, is undesired by a man.
See,
That was
and
that was
mine-
lifelong punishment.
Mine was the fear of hell, damnation, doom, all of these things. And we're going to talk about this in a future episode. We kind of talk about the doom and gloom of the Bible and end times and hell and all of that fun stuff. But it's funny that you looked at it in a very different way. Either way, it was like you're doomed to misery one way or another.
Yes. Like it was basically painted as no one will want you. And that was reinforced by the fact that I was the only one of my friends who wasn't getting married. You know?
Yeah, that probably has a lot to do with it too, because isn't it so wild that virginity is held in this like high thing, and it's not for women, it's for men. You know, like the Muslim culture is like, oh, you're gonna get these 62 virgins or whatever it is in heaven. As a man who's grown up and who's had sex, I would never want a virgin. Let me tell you. Like, I'm just saying that.
Purity culture frames men as predators. There's so much
Yeah.
predatory language in
Oh,
purity
that's why
culture.
Weinstein and Cosby and all
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
Purity culture.
it's purity culture.
I'm
it's
blaming
true.
purity culture.
Like when I listen to my girlfriend speak, I'm like, did you hear how you just talked about him? It literally makes him sound like he's a predator.
It is predatory. And the Bible has all kinds of stories about predatory behavior, but it's dressed up as like, well, but I mean, God liked him, so he could do that. You know,
Yeah.
King
Good old
David.
You
Yeah.
can go on and on.
Solomon, right?
Solomon,
Was he
yeah.
the one with like all the freaking...
So, Maddie Jo, you have a really important story, and we don't need to go into all the details because we talked about it a lot in last season. But I've come to find out more and more and more women who have very similar stories, which is after you lose your virginity, there's suddenly this idea, like I said, about eating the candy bar, where it's like, well, fuck it. And the problem is, the one thing that this is all about is about having like healthy sex in their view, the Puritan view. But then you actually go into self-destructive mode because of your loss of self-worth. And that's a very common story I'm finding from females who lost it. And that's the thing. It's something you're losing.
Right.
Right? Your virginity is so special. When you lose it, you know, it's like the Lord of the Rings. You lost the ring, well, you know, it's all over. Real briefly, if you want to remind the viewers and listeners, like what happened to you from there as far as it just kind of like self-destructive behavior of well, I have no value to a man now.
Yeah. Yeah. So basically and it wasn't conscious. Like that's what I always want to
Absolutely not.
reiterate is that until I got clinical professional help, I was not fully aware of all of these things. But basically what happened is after I lost my virginity and then I moved and then I was in New York City and I had pretty much settled into the fact that I was not going to get married. I was going to be on this path of an actor, artist, whatever. No one, much to my dismay, no men in their early 20s in New York City wanted to get married. I was like, really? None of you? But you're also rich. And none of them wanted to get married. I was like, okay, fine. And so I said I just wanted to have a lot of sex, not because I think I was just trying to make up for lost time, and I also thought that's what everybody else was doing. So again, I was not operating from a sense of self. I was operating from this is what society expects of me. And then it just got to the point where I call it like I was trying to fuck away the shame. I just thought if I just have enough sex, this will not feel wrong anymore.
And is like silly as that you laughed as you said it, but I mean that it's like trying to overcome your fear or something like that. Like it actually makes sense from somebody trying to overcome something.
Yeah, I was trying to normalize it for myself. But what ended up happening is I was like, I think I'm having like just as unsuccessful sexual experiences as all of my friends who are married right now. These are not fun. I'm not having a good time. I don't remember most of them because something I learned in therapy was that I was dissociating. So that's a trauma response where my body was present, but I wasn't. So like I knew I had sex with these guys, but could remember zero details. And that happened really often. And so then the 2016 world was happening, and I remember I don't know, it was just this awakening. I underwent like a lot of personal stuff, personal development. I like started reading like Jen Sincero, making vision boards, working out regularly. I was vegan. There was a lot of transformation happening. And then I had kind of just like an aha moment with a guy where I was like, you didn't listen to me. I was very clear about this and you didn't listen to me. So that's a whole thing. And then I was sexually assaulted in 2016 as well, right after the election. And it was one of those situations, and I know a lot of women, now that I've come out and like spoken about it, I know they can relate, which is I left that experience going like, well, can I really call it rape? Like, was I raped enough? Right. Because it was a date. I liked him. Like, I was into him. I just thought I made it very clear I didn't want to have sex that night. This was as I was trying to map out a sexual ethic that made sense to me. And at every front, I was basically just getting men who weren't listening to me. Yeah. So that can also be very defeating in the process. Yeah. It's like you're trying to stand up for yourself, but no one's complying. Yeah. And so then that sent me on.
And because you're still dealing with purity culture, you may have been trying to redefine it, but there's still the sense that like you still need to be worthy of this man, and you should still prove some worth to him. Mm-hmm. You know, like you're still struggling with that identity and with that self-love. And
for women, we're supposed to just be palatable.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
smile, baby.
Did I not say it in like an aggressive enough way? Yeah. Should I have been louder? You know, like I was going through all of these. And so, and then that's when I got into sexual trauma therapy. And then from there, I was able to really reconstruct everything in how I dated. And I just went into all of it with like way more intention and clarity. Mm-hmm. So that now where I am at 32 years old, it's just a whole different ball game from I was existing in a fog before.
Sorry, whole different ball game was just a really good pun there. I know you didn't mean that.
Did that answer the question?
Absolutely. Okay. I can't remember the question, but I think it was, what's the name of your book? So everything you just talked about tees up kind of where I want to end the conversation over these next few minutes is kind of what to do with all of this. Because I mean, the first thing is just recognizing that it has an impact on you. And even you weren't raised in a purity culture church, environment. You still had the effects of it. Yes. Because purity culture, like I said, is two gendered. There is no such thing as homosexual sex in purity culture. There is no such thing as any kind of enjoyable sex, to be honest. If you really buy into purity culture, it's like there's like one position, and it's not fun.
Missionary, their favorite. Yeah. Evangelicals love mission work.
I just don't understand that.
Anything outside of that is deviant.
It really is. And I mean, it says it specifically in, I think, Hebrews and Proverbs about the marital bed shall not be defiled. And of course, that's up to the interpreter, but so is the whole Bible and the things that people pull out of it, which are just insane. What Maddie Jo did is the most important thing, is sought help. I mean, to be able to fight through purity culture on your own is a losing battle. Not that there's not things you can do, but even just that isn't enough because you need an objective person with the skills and the tools to lend to you. And that person is Beth, sitting right here next to me. How does somebody find help, and what does that look like?
When somebody's looking for help, first of all, it's very, very difficult for most people. Most people never get out of purity culture.
Just coming out and saying it out loud makes it very real.
And going back to that dissociative experience that you were talking about, the first step is to really focus on becoming in tune and getting to know your body again. And most of the work is at the beginning is to make that individual feel safe, because they don't trust their body. They've been taught for so long not to trust it. And how can you know what you want, or what you like? Our body at all times is giving us certain cues that are so important that we want to be able to recognize. But those coming out of purity culture don't really understand those. So that's the first level of business, if you will, is to help those individuals to,
And what
to understand their
what does
body.
that look like?
And
Like,
that is called, it's called somatic therapy. And a lot of it is going to be like mindfulness, body scanning, doing a lot of that work to make a lot of sensory. It can be like some people have success with scents and things like that. And then you move on to getting into sort of some heavy lifting as far as with the body, like maybe doing some masturbation, getting
Yeah.
to know your body and its responses in a way that that the individual had never really been comfortable doing before. And then you would get into sort of the work that you had previously mentioned, Matt, the incredible work of like Erica Smith. She does this, she has this great tool and research. It's called the Sexual Values Workbook. And she just does a fantastic job of breaking down the difference between what the individual coming out of purity culture's values are individually as opposed to what they were taught.
yeah. And I went through it myself, and it's great because it's not trying to prescribe anything. It's just having you answer questions by asking yourself, how do I think about this? What do I believe is this? And there is no right or wrong answer, but there were a few aha moments as I'm going through it. I'm like, shit, I really do. Like I said, like, how do I define sex? I guess I never really thought about that. And I highly recommend that workbook. And I, like you said, it's a journey, and I don't think it's a short one. I think it's, you and I were talking about this before. It's like when you talk about somebody who's in recovery from alcoholism or drug use, I think you're going to be an always in recovery, purity culture. What's the term you like to use?
Recovering evangelical.
Yeah.
So people will ask me like, at what point are you a recovered evangelical? I was like, never.
Never.
Because you're just always
Yeah.
coming up against these things, because if it's literally from the time you were born, this shit's molecular.
Yeah.
So you're going to be up against it.
Yeah, and the studies, like even what's happened, the book I talked about a lot in season 1, the Resma Menikin talks about my grandmother's hands and kind of how racism is processed in our DNA. I mean, we pass down some of these things and trauma, first and foremost, through our DNA. Like, to say that, well, our parents just fucked us up. They were fucked up too. There's a reason it got passed on to us. It doesn't, so, like my friend who said, well, I don't want to bash my parents. There's a big difference between saying they are evil and I hate them and saying like they still gave this to me and I need to talk to them. I will say, I don't know how much of it was based in reality, but I told my mom not that long ago that how we were raised was what we were taught about sex was really damaging. She's like, why? What? And I told her, she's like, oh, I don't know if she didn't remember or if she just was in denial, but she did apologize for what it's worth. And she felt bad. And I go, I'm working through it. I go, you got 4 other kids who probably never have. And I said, and I'm not trying to speak for any of them, but when 3 of them are women, I can only imagine what it did to them. And so, I think it's worth talking about, and you can't, like you said, you can't just be in that abusive relationship and not remove yourself without either perpetuating that abuse or, just accepting it and letting it continue. So I think you have to talk about it. You have to talk about the people who you experienced these things with and work through them. But the biggest thing is having help. You can't do it alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And probably the most important part of the process is, Matt, what you and both of you have just shared, and that telling the narrative, telling your story. And the more you're able and really noticing the experience for yourself, the more times that you're telling it and how you're feeling. Are you feeling more empowered? Are you feeling less, we want the distressing situation of you telling it to decrease over time. That's where you know that it's
Healing.
healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And the somatic aspect of it, just to piggyback on like what do we do about purity culture, is so important, because I think that was a big part of my therapy as well, was just leaning into how do I feel in this moment, because you're taught how you're supposed to feel about it, and then there's actually tuning into what you're actually feeling and really learning to trust your body's cues. And it's not just sexually. It's like for women, there's a lot of my purity culture stuff was also heavily tied into eating disorder stuff. So it's like I spent so much of my life not understanding my hunger cues, not feeling safe in my own vessel ever. So you're just living in stress always. So to undo all of that is a lot of work, and it's layered. It's not just sexually.
But my God, is it worth it?
Yes.
There's probably somebody watching this or listening to this who's in denial, because I've been there. It's like, no, this is not, this hasn't messed me up. It's okay. It has affected so many people. And the first step is just saying, okay, maybe it's okay for me to talk about this out loud. And then it just gets better and better. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but my God, it's so much more work to live that lifestyle and be so unfulfilled and unhappy. I tell you from personal experience. Seriously, it's so much more work to live like that. So get some help. Call Beth.
Yes.
Sir Mylan,
Yes.
what was the most helpful thing to you in your process of battling self-doubt?
My faith.
And see, that's so funny.
Ironically.
Because, no, but that's what's beautiful about it. Because something else wasn't pushed on you. You have this like raw, natural, beautiful belief what religion is supposed to be, but they muck it up.
Yeah, I mean, I've studied and read a lot about different religions and spirituality and self-healing and all that different stuff. And I think that I kind of developed my own outlook on it.
If you ask most people what's God, they're like, oh, it's a relationship. But then they define that relationship to you. And it's like if I were to ask you, well, what's your relationship to Maddie Jo? And then you tell me, and that's your relationship with her too. Like, no, your relationship with God or whatever you believe in is yours. I think it's beautiful that you made your own.
I think that I pull from the universe. I pull from my ancestors. And I definitely believe in Jesus, that he was sent here to make things okay here for us. However, it's important to me. And as I listen to you guys talk about, what's going on in your life, what happened, all that, I do can identify with a lot of that.
Sure.
With the purity of it and your faith against it and all that different kind of stuff.
Well, and this is in the larger theme of what we're doing in this season of church trauma, because we're talking about two different things. We're talking about religion and we're talking about faith. Faith is a beautiful thing. It's like politics. Politics is butt ugly, but the democratic process is a beautiful thing. And you have that beautiful part, which is that raw belief in something where you feel connected to something bigger than you. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I don't care what it is you believe. It has nothing to do with me. And I actually probably have more faith than most people think, because of how much I gladly bash organized religion. I very much believe in certain things. I just don't like when other people push their beliefs on others. And I think it's wonderful. And that's why I kind of thought you were a great addition to this panel. It's because the very thing that hurt us, or at least what it was supposed to be, was the thing that gave you hope. And that's great. And that tells me that there's something valuable in there. It's just other people put their own agendas on top of it and shoved it down our throats and said, this is the way. So I'm happy for you.
Yeah. I think that I do have an issue with organized religion. I really do.
As you should.
Because it's just, okay, like, what are we here for? Like,
Yeah.
Okay, so you're driving a BMW and I have a hoopty.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
And by the way, Jesus will love you
Jesus
if
will
you give me
love
some
you,
money.
And your shoes were like $1,300. So I try to understand those things. But then I think about what God has done for me and the situations that he has brought me out of and how he has saved me. So I think about that, and I just don't. So I stopped doing a lot of the church thing.
Good.
Because it's full of a lot of hypocrites.
Yes.
And, even though I may go to a concert here or maybe a Bible study there, but I pulled myself out of it so that I can, continue with my outlook on it so that I can go on with life. And I've been great.
That's awesome.
And I sing, so being a psalmist is something that's important. So, people don't have that gift to be able to move people. As we do as artists, I think all of us who are artists, that's our gift that was from somewhere. I think somebody put that in us to be able to help people, because that's what I do my artistry for, because art heals. So everything that I write, everything that I perform, everything that I teach these kids and all that stuff is for our people. Black, white, Latin, whatever. Because I teach all different type, and I perform with and a lot of different other people. I don't, put people in categories. People are people. So I think that some type of higher being, because I always thought I had a higher level of consciousness anyway.
I mean, I always thought you did too.
I mean, of course. So, but put that in us to be able to do the things that we do.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And all I know is that whatever it is, however you define him, it, she, that puts
Lilith, whoever it
that
is.
put something in you, that made something beautiful, isn't sitting there watching you masturbate and going, God damn it, I gave him all of this and now he's pissing it all away.
All on a sock.
I think that's a good segue to say, stay tuned, because we have another episode next week coming up that is somewhat of a continuation on this subject, but with a very special guest. Thank you to all of my guests for being here today, and thank you for sharing your personal stories as well as some very educated wisdom. And for those of you fighting off your baggage of purity culture, talk about it. Talk about it with someone, even if it's just yourself, so you can say those words out loud. I think that's the first step.
Will be enough. Our lease is ending now.
We just went there. Now you can go to thegoingtherepodcast.com for links to all the podcast platforms, our socials, and of course, YouTube. While you're at it, give us a rating, share with a friend, and subscribe. And next time you need some nice hanky-panky music, check out Dissimilar South. You can find them at dissimilarsouth.com.
Letting the fuck go.
This podcast is made possible by its hosts and Frame One Media in association with Joe Calley and Bobby Thomas.